Hi, everybody. I am Chris Butler. Thank you so much for having me here. This is my first time speaking to the Laguna Woods Astronomy Club, and it's a delight to be able to speak to you tonight. I have a long history doing lectures about astronomy, 35, 40 years now, something like that I've been doing this. And as has been mentioned, I'm not an astronomer. So you may wonder, what in the world am I doing here at all? Well, don't worry, there's a reason for this. Professionally, I'm an artist. I've been a staff artist at Griffith Observatory for 21 years, doing exhibit design and animation on planetarium shows and exhibits for them. In addition, I've been working with magazines and newspapers all over the world, doing scientific illustration, not only astronomy, but also a lot of paleobiology work, dinosaurs, geology, all kinds of things like that, for the likes of Omni magazine when it existed, the Orange County Register, National Geographic, and so forth over the years. And what this has done, this has put me in an interesting in-between position. Really, I am the C-3PO of astronomy and space science, meaning that I'm an interpreter. That's actually what I do. Between the everyday common folk public out there who are interested in these things and the scientific researchers who actually make these discoveries, someone needs to communicate what it might look like, what it might be like, what it might mean, even the meaning, the implications of some of these things. Now, I don't know how many of you read scientific papers. They are a little dry around the edges. And I certainly have had plenty of time working with space scientists. In fact, up at Griffith Observatory, I work with people from JPL all the time, and we've had teams of the researchers who are working on missions to Europa and Mars and Saturn, all these different places, who will come in and talk with us. But a lot of times I'll have questions for them, which are common sense questions, things I think all of you would be interested in finding out about that they might not have even considered. A good example of that, working on a film for National Geographic years ago, we had a scene on the early Earth when it was a brand new baby Earth, still had that new Earth smell. And I was asking a scientist, what color was the sky? Because we needed to know that. We were going to show it. And he said, I've never thought about that. He could talk about the percentage of methane in the atmosphere and nitrogen. He could roll out charts for you left and right about all the particulate compositions and the temperatures and everything else. But he had never thought about what color it was, because that wasn't relevant to the research he was doing. That's when an artist steps into the mix and tries to do a little bit of interpreting. Now, that means that I've had plenty of conversation with serious scientists over the years. I've also had plenty of conversation with the average folks, and I've also had conversation with a strange sort of character called an amateur astronomer, of which I have known many, and of course I've been one myself now for 45 years. So I can speak to the interests of all those different sorts of folks. The talk tonight, From 9 Planets to 9 Billion Worlds, is the talk. If I had to just give one talk, it would be on that topic. It is that subject, meaning how things have changed. How things have changed and how much they've changed, and changed during our lives. Everyone in the room probably remembers when there were 9 planets, right? And I don't mean just the demotion of Pluto. It isn't that. It's just astronomy made sense. Everything was a particular way. You get the books when you're in junior high school, you read about it, and it is that way for a little while. But if you want a hobby, if you want something to be interested in that isn't going to turn upside down and change on you and throw you for a loop, this is not the hobby you want. Now, my home astronomy club, the Orange County Astronomers, there's another club that meets down the hall. It's the Turtle Club. They're okay. Things in turtles are pretty much set. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't change too much. If that's the kind of thing you'd like, astronomy's not your thing. But there's a phrase that my mom had for people like all of you, which is to say, you're peculiar.
And peculiar, actually, if you pecula, speculum in your Latin, it actually means people who see things, people who are worthy of being seen and noted. So it's not an insult. But the point is also you're a little bit odd because there are people all around you who are doing different things tonight. You're in an astronomy club meeting, all right? You're already a little suspect. Trust me, I know. Now, I have a very normal neighbor named Bart. I bring him into everything. He lives down the street from me. Bart is not concerned about things like this except when I walk my dog because I'm the astronomer guy down the street. And he will come and ask me questions about what's going on up there in the sky. What does that mean? All kinds of strange questions. And you yourselves, by even attending an astronomy club meeting or watching a video about it online, for those of us who will see this later, you're already an expert in most people's minds. They're going to ask you questions about tonight's presentation. So, what did they talk about at the astronomy club? The usual answer, if you just want to get out of it really easy, is you wouldn't understand. It was so complicated. It was like about the universe and like the beginning of everything, and like the point of everything is smaller than the head of a pin and bigger than the entire cosmos, and it was really far out. That's the standard answer. Just wave your hands and everybody will let you off the hook. But for all of you, you're in the middle of this. You're in the middle of a time of tremendous change. Change during my lifetime, your lifetime, and the people coming next. All of this is going to happen in the near future. Now, let's talk a word or two about astronomy and what it means. This picture here is it's actually a painting. It's been referenced that I'm an artist. This is a painting that I did many years ago of the moon rising actually up over Big Bear. Big Bear is a place where they have astronomy events. And one time I saw the moon rising with a halo around it and everything. Very pretty, very scenic. For a lot of people, astronomy is just pretty scenery. It's just pretty backgrounds for your life. It was the background for everything you ever did. If it was clear on any given night, any party, any cruise you ever took, it's the background of all those scenes. Just a bunch of little twinkling lights, which are just Christmas tree lights rigged up there in the sky to serve as a backdrop. For some people, that's what astronomy is. It's not threatening. Nature can be like that. You can be out in the desert and look at the scenery of the desert and say, oh, look at this, all the beautiful colors and everything else, the Grand Canyon. It's just a scene there to be a background for you. But there's another side to nature. There's another side to why you're here. This is a picture of something that I recreated, something that I did when I was a kid, young kid, and it was frightening. It's the kind of thing I'm afraid my daughter will do. I was notorious during lightning storms and thunderstorms as a child. My father lived in terror of me going out to the garage, as I would, getting the ladder and getting on top of the house. Because there's something about a lightning storm that's intimidating, isn't it? The shapes you see in the clouds during the momentary flashes of light. Of course, the big blast, the sound when it hits you. Nature can be just as enthralling because of its dangers and challenges. I'm told by my father that I would sit up there on the roof and say, go ahead, scare me. That's a way to approach nature. It explains both rock climbing and roller coasters at the same time. We like a good scare. We like to hang our nose out into the dark, into the unknown, into the mysterious and spooky. And for many of us in astronomy, that's part of this. Because we are on a chase on some of the biggest, most hair-raising questions possible, and it isn't just philosophy. There's a danger of finding answers during your lifetime. And we are, which is part of it. So think about it that way. Nature can be both a beautiful scene and an intimidating challenge. Philosophers, you have to remember that astronomers for a very long time were just what they called natural philosophers. Point. In that form of thinking, Any answer is as good as any other answer. Meaning, what are the stars? I think the stars are like holes drilled in the firmament of heaven. The light of heaven is shining through them, one guy says. Another guy next to him says, I think they're the lights of distant campfires lit by our ancestors. I don't know who that might be. Why they sound like they're like from Brooklyn. We all know who I'm talking like. I knew him, so I can tease him. But the point is, who knows? When you're done talking about it, one guy's opinion, her opinion, it doesn't matter. The point in having the discussion was to have a theoretical discussion about different ways of looking at the world. And who knows what the truth is? There's no way to answer the question. You talk about whether the earth is a sphere, a cube, a rectangle. Until somebody starts trying to come up with an experiment to prove it, nobody has to get in a bar fight over it, okay? But once you start getting to experiments, you're out of just the realm of philosophy. It's important to understand that's where astronomy gets into trouble, is when it starts answering questions and testing ideas. Now, the people that are out there chasing down these great ideas, I mentioned that I've met Dr. Sagan. It's true, I have. A number of years ago, I met Stephen Hawking, and yeah, that was really something. I got to spend a good 15, 20 minutes talking with him, and by the way, he was cracking off-color jokes the whole time. Great guy, really miss him. A number of other astronomers that I've met who are heads of space missions at NASA and so forth, I've had a lot of conversations with them. And they can all be approachable, interesting people in lots of different ways. But one of the things I found among many, but not all, is that they kind of like to have a little bit of distance from you. A little bit. That they are the researcher. And they'll tell you a little bit about what they found up on the mountaintop. I'd be exactly the same way. You put a lab coat on me, everything changes. At a certain point, well, like right now, here I am standing in front of you. Who is this guy? Some artist, right? I'm the presenter and you are the audience. We all have that tendency. And this is kind of seductive, I think, with the people who were involved with researching astronomy. There was one lady who was just interviewed on National Public Radio, and she was talking about some new planet that they'd found and so forth. And they were asking her, so what's the determining factor, for whether this new planet could be habitable? And she said, well, really, it's the bolometric flux. Again, oh, honey. The word for that is called sunshine. It's the amount of sunshine. But they can't help it sometimes, and I don't think I could either. We want to use the words that let you know why you are listening to me and not the other way around. So that's a pretension, and it's out there. It's an aspect of what goes on in this because there's a resistance, a natural resistance to confronting a different idea, a change of idea, a challenge, if it's coming from an everyday person, as opposed to another researcher. Say, let me see the credentials and the letters under your name. What have you been published in? How often have you been published? And by the way, what university did you go to? And then we'll see about your idea. There's a little bit of that out there. We're all human. There are people who live in the ivory tower. This is a make-believe ivory tower, not a real ivory tower. People who know that I work at Griffith Observatory assume that, that is kind of what Griffith Observatory is, isn't it? We're up on top of the hill, up above the city, in the weird-looking building with the floodlights up on it. And sometimes when you stand up there and you're looking out those windows down at the lights of the common people. There was a phrase from the opening of Griffith Observatory in 1935. The speaker who was opening the place that day said, "It is nobly situated above the dwellings of men." Well, it's hard not to fall into that. Astronomy, some people think it's kind of like that, but really, a lot of astronomy can be understood very well by everybody, even including Bart, my neighbor down the street. When I take the time and explain it to him, it makes perfect sense because, and I'm guessing, this is not entirely sure because we are in the LA area, pretty much everybody here is from Earth, and that means you grew up on a planet circling a star, hurtling through a galaxy. Pretty much you're already involved in this game. You are already astronomy people because how could you not? A goldfish by its nature is an aquarium expert or a river or a stream expert. You can't help it because you're swimming in it. Okay, so we have to remember that side of it. But for most folks, this is a picture of the constellation of Draco the Dragon above the city of Los Angeles, an animation that I did years ago. And it says, "Here be dragons." Of course, I'm just having a play on Draco the Dragon being a constellation visible up there. But really, the idea, that's what they used to write at the edge of the map, right? "Here be dragons, unknown." That's astronomy for you. There's a reason Bart approaches me uncertainly, because I live in "Here be dragons." I think about things he hasn't heard about. I'm worried about things he doesn't know about. It's strange, and it may happen to you. Anybody, if you have, any of you have normal friends, normal people? If you know some, just tell them you went to an astronomy club meeting tonight, and just see if they don't kind of furrow their brow a little bit at you. What are you doing? You know, it's like, well, yeah, we had a hadron particle collider and we reversed time briefly, but you know, we had to get on to the cupcakes after that. It was just a little thing we did. So there is that kind of feeling that you're on the outside here. Most people even here around us in this very town, have a very solid, simple, realistic understanding of the real world. And I can draw a map of it. It looks like this. This is the real world. Now, the real world is a fisheye map of the Earth, with wherever you are from drawn larger than every other part of the Earth, much larger and much more important. Then toward the edge, farther away, are places you've heard about, maybe you've visited once or twice. For a person in the medieval world, well, this would be somebody maybe living in, New Mexico, something like that in this case, where Los Angeles is known to them, certainly, but it's not as important and it's toward the edge of the map. In medieval times, most people lived and died their whole lives within 25 miles of the place where they were born. That was their world. So in that, if you lived that kind of life, San Diego would be a rumor. You would have heard stories about San Diego, but you certainly wouldn't have been there. And if somebody told you the people in San Diego have 3 eyes in the middle of their forehead, you'd say, well, I suppose that's possible. I mean, I've never been there, right? Stories on the frontier can be weird. And you wonder why most people, or at least a lot of people out there will entertain ideas maybe that we didn't go to the moon or whatever. Things that sound a little odd. The point is, it's on the edge of the map. All that's unknown. It's interesting that in our time, the map has changed a little bit. One of the places that used to be an imaginary place, a place of fantasy, for you is very real, which is the sky. The sky, the blue layer there, you know it because you are of just the last 2 or 3 generations only. You've been to the sky. You've looked down on clouds. If you ever want to wonder if you live in a time of magic, think about the fact you looked down on clouds and what Julius Caesar would have given to be able to do that. The most powerful people in the world, none of them had ever looked down on mountains and flown over them. You've done it. Now the sky, it doesn't mean that you like the sky. Okay, I've flown too, all right. The meals up there aren't very good, but the scenery can be fantastic. So the sky is real for you. But past that, how many people do we have in the room who have been in space? Just checking. Anybody here been in space? Okay. I asked that once, and the commander of Apollo 15 was in the room. I did that intentionally because I knew there were people in the room who were moon hoax people, So I just asked that. I said, how many people here have ever been to the moon? And one guy raised his hand. It was beautiful, the reaction. But no, but still, 20, 50 years from now, the answer is not going to be the same. There'll be lots of people who've seen black sky and stars in daylight. So your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, probably I'd be asking, how many people here have been to the moon? And a bunch of hands would go up. So we're changing. Life is changing dramatically during our own lifetime. We like things, though, to stay the way they're supposed to be. We really do. I do. I mentioned the 9 planets thing and Pluto, and everybody here is like, oh, yeah. These new crazy ideas. They turn everything upside down. They're revising things all the time. So there's a hesitancy. There's a reluctance when something new, creepy, and weird happens. And I've seen this many, many, many times over my lifetime. Back in 1979, the Voyager spacecraft was closing in on Jupiter and its moons. We're getting our first good pictures of the moons. Everybody knew what the moons were going to look like. The moons were going to look like, well, our moon, meaning a ball with a bunch of craters on it. But one of them, as they started getting closer to it, looked really wrong. I mean wrong. It looked like a pizza. No joke. This is Io, for those of you who know the volcanic moon Io. But I remember sitting in the visitors gallery at JPL watching the first pictures as they were drawn on the television screen, and people were frowning. They weren't saying, oh, wow, something new. People were going, that's not right. That's not, what is that thing? That's disturbing. What is this? And then gradually we came to accept it, but astronomy does that for you. It'll present some information that's really surprising. Don't be surprised if you flinch a little. For a long time, this is what Mars was. Mars was a little, well, of course, from ancient times, Mars was a little orange star in the sky. That's it. That's all it was. It moved through the constellations. What is Mars? Mars is that. But even in the era of telescopes, Mars was just this. Some people in the room will remember when Mars was just a little ochre-colored disk with shady little markings on it. We didn't know what it really was. We couldn't see it really well. The idea of going there was a wild fantasy. And there are some people I've met who miss the old days, these stupid space probes, and going out there finding things about these planets. I liked my Mars the way it was. Well, remember the Mars canals, right? The Percival Lowell and others in the early part of the 20th century. They had their idea of what Mars was. They had a dream for the Martian civilization and all the rest of it. And now the space probes go and ruin it, with this fact stuff they keep beaming back. And not just Mars, the moon, same thing. In the old days, maybe you've seen illustrations of the moon with giant, jagged, pointy mountains on the moon, right? And the craters that all have the big, scoopy, raised rims. There were lots of people who thought through simple mistakes that was what the moon looked like. And then we get there in the 1960s, and they're just softly rounded hills. And it's just not as cool as what they'd cooked up in their mind. There was an artist, fellow artist named David Hardy, who painted a picture of the Apollo 11 lander on the moon with giant, jagged, pointy mountains around it. The title of the painting is The Way It Was Supposed to Be. Okay, so we're all guilty of that. Then the space probes, as I've mentioned, we start getting pictures back in. These start becoming worlds that we at least have pictures of. We start to understand them physically. Does anybody here, I was a little bit young, I was born in '64, but some of you may remember the great disappointment when we got our first close-up pictures of Mars. This was 1965, when the Mariner space probe, Mariner 4, took the first pictures, because we still had the possibility of life on Mars and everything else. And actually up there in the corner is an early Mariner picture of Mars. And they came back and it showed craters and desolation. And people were just really, oh, ouch, ouch, that's not what we were hoping to see. A big surprise. And all the way even through the Viking landings on the moon, 1976. Interesting interviews with Carl Sagan during that, where Carl had grown up reading Edgar Rice Burroughs and all these stories about the Martian civilizations and everything, and now they got pictures from the ground, and it looks like Barstow. It's that bad, all right? It's dead. There is no sign of anything living. It's Barstow without a McDonald's, okay? And they're interviewing Carl Sagan on TV, and this younger Carl Sagan is saying, well, there's nothing in the pictures that definitely discounts the possibility of life, or there may be life just over the horizon where we can't see. I'm going, oh, Carl. Let it go, Carl. Come on. Of course, we've recently had more surprises where it looks like Mars may not be dead after all, and that's its own can of worms, okay? So it goes back and forth. I grew up with the dead Mars. I'm used to the dead Mars. I'm fine with that. And now they're starting to talk about weird methane emissions and maybe underground reservoirs where creatures could be living under the surface, but I liked my dead Mars. I was happy with that. But astronomy keeps you guessing. Things change all the time. There was a moment, real moment, where things changed in astronomy. See, for a long time, it was the philosophers, right? Sitting out there on a rock, campfire, pointing at lights in the sky, and nobody can know what it is. And for a long time also, it was telescopes, looking at places like the planets. And you couldn't really know what was going on. You had mathematical formulae, you had guesses, you had maybe some photographs and things like that, but it wasn't really a physical kind of world. These were astronomers, proper astronomers who were doing the research. But that changed. It changed dramatically. The year it changed was 1960 in particular. And it had changed right here in this area, Southern California, because some of the aerospace companies knew there was a chance we were actually going to go to the moon, even before the Kennedy announcement. And some of them started forming study groups for what are we going to do on the moon. We're going to be there. This isn't about looking at it through a telescope and reflected light and all the rest of this. No, I'm talking about being there. So the kinds of people they brought in were geologists, okay, from the U.S. Geological Survey. I want you to understand how different astronomers and geologists are. Geologists work in the daytime. Astronomers work at night. Most astronomers, work in a laboratory. Geologists work in the field. Astronomers explore with sensors and telescopes and computers. Geologists use hammers and dynamite, all right? They're a very physical, visceral kind of exploring. And this is important because of what we were going to do on the moon. We were going to touch it. We're going to hold it in our hand. This is not a little light in the sky anymore. You're going to hold the moon in your hand. You're going to whack pieces off of rock and bring them home and describe it as a physical, real thing that anyone in this room could understand. You might not understand an astrophysical theory if somebody came out here and started talking about those kinds of numbers and equations, but I put a rock in your hand, you get it. That's something you know. That's the change that happened. Now you're assuming that these two groups of people got along beautifully. I've talked to too many of them. I've talked to astrogeologists. I've talked to astrophysical theoreticians. Not so much. And it wasn't just the fact that the geologists had Jeeps and commonly girlfriends and sunburns. They actually had sunburns. The geologists would go into NASA offices wearing sunglasses just to show it off a little bit. They're kind of like the astronauts. This is how a geologist sees Mars. This is actually a map of one portion of the Martian surface. And you can see it's all gridded out. It's exactly mapped. It's photographed in detail. And way more than that. Way more than that. Geologists dissect and devour a landscape in detailed understanding. When Jack Schmitt, who is in this picture, was a geologist who went to the moon. We only sent one scientist to a moon, and notice it wasn't an astronomer. There were astronomer astronauts. They didn't go to the moon. They sent a geologist to go do this. Jack Schmidt's visit to the moon is one of the most important things that happened. They only dared send an astronaut there at the very last minute. That is a whole story how Jack Schmitt got that spot away from someone else who was scheduled to go on Apollo 17 named Joe Engle. Poor Joe got booted. He was just a rocket pilot, and Jack Schmitt got his spot to bring that kind of analysis to another world. This is a painting I did of an astronaut on Mars, and this is actually the same change that's kind of already happened for Mars. You probably don't have much trouble thinking about Mars as a real physical place. The reason for that are called rovers. The rovers have cameras that work like your eyes, and they're looking from about ground level, so you can imagine it as a view you would have. That's very different than flying over it with an orbiter, taking pictures from space, and certainly very different from looking from here. When you send a rover, it becomes a real place. Now, I'll use this as a test for those of you, because we got a lot of astronomers here in the audience. I'll name a place that isn't real to you yet. Europa. Europa, moon of Jupiter, is an example of a place where instantly you think Europa, up comes a picture, which is you know what it looks like. It's a ball. You know what the colors of it. It's white with little brown crisscrossing lines and everything else. But if you had a rover there and you saw the landscape and you saw Jupiter hanging over it, that's what I try to do as an artist. Those are the kinds of things I try to do before we get there. I try to paint that so it can be real for you. But even then, you know it's not true. It's like a movie or something like that. An artist is about illusion, really. We do our best. But when you make that change and you put a camera there, or better yet, a person, if you listen, you watch the TV from the moon, the most important instrument we sent to the moon were the people, because they could react to it emotionally. They could say, "That's a big rock," as Charlie Duke famously said, for a rock that was the size of this entire building that they're walking up to. A robot would have just trundled up and shot a picture. But when you hear Charlie Duke starting to lose it, you know, "Look at the size of that rock!" He was from Georgia. And he's very excited. You go, "Oh, I get it. That thing must be huge." You understand it because somebody is there who has feelings like you. There are a couple of stages, 4 stages to letting astronomy into your heart. It takes time. The first one I've already described is theoretical. It's an idea. I have my ideas, you have your ideas. Anybody's idea might be all right, okay? That's a starting point. But then we move to number 2. It's not theoretical, it's what we call astrophysical. You can also use the word mathematical, meaning you can make guesses and theories that might explain it, but you have competing different equations and theories, and like with Mars, when it was just a little disk in the sky, you could say, well, that could be riverbeds, or the changing colors could be from vegetation, or that spectral reflectance could be because of dust being uncovered by wind blowing around. There's still no answer. It's all in the models. This is something theoreticians can argue about. But it is a next step. It is a next step. At least there's math involved. Number 3, though, geophysical means you get a good enough picture of it that you can argue about, say, no, actually that's a creek, that's a mountain, that's a rock. From a distance, maybe looking down on it, you can at least start to see it as a physical thing. That's where you are on Europa right now. You're cool with Europa. You understand step 3. It's a ball, it goes around Jupiter, it's a physical, real thing. But there's that last step, which is step 4 in astronomy. That's really when it drives home and it becomes physical. It becomes the kind of thing that you say, a world, an alien world is a world and not a planet. Important element of the title, going from planets which just means wanderer, by the way, in Greek, planetas, a wandering star, to being a world. That's different. That's what's happened now with the moon. It is a world that isn't this one. Mars is rapidly becoming a world that isn't this one. You are transitioning from lights in the sky to a place where you could live or walk or be. All right, now into the scary stuff, the deep end of the swimming pool here. I will not shy away from the weird and scary things, all these big, amazing questions, because we are really wading into it now. Things that those philosophers were arguing about on their rock, we are confronting these days. It is funny that we have been a little bit reluctant. Is there anybody here, an old-time astronomer guy like me, amateur, who has a copy of Burnham's Celestial Handbook? This was a beloved book, published in 1978. It's the one I cut my teeth on. I read Burnham's over and over and over again, and I absolutely scoured it for any reference of the great holy grail, planets around other stars, because I had seen Star Wars, and I had my suspicions it was probably true. I wanted to know if there really were. And I found a few references in the book that suggested that maybe there are clues. But notice the way this one's phrased. If you actually read this particular quote, it's talking about a 1940s observation. This one guy has found something that's super small, a companion to a star, and it would be 8 times heavier than Jupiter, which, by the way, would make it a planet and not a star, no doubt about it, if this thing had really been there. But you'll notice the way he writes it. He says, well, you could consider it as an exceptionally small star, meaning it's still in the astrophysical world. It's still deep space astronomy. It's about numbers. It's about telescopes. They were reluctant to have there be planets around other stars, because then those darn geologists are going to come knocking on the door with their hammers and their dynamite and their jeeps, and they're going to want to turn this into a new kind of astronomy, which is, of course, something happening right now. This is a painting I did a few years ago of a planet around another star. In this case, 47 Ursae Majoris b, 47 light years away out toward the Big Dipper. Are there planets around other stars? Oh, yeah. Now, on my last day in college in 1989, or was that, pardon me, 87, it was in 87, I actually wrote in the library, I snuck into the room where we used to have our astronomy club meetings, and in chalk on the inside of a cabinet, I wrote, "There are planets around other stars." And I closed the cabinet. And I thought, I'm going to wait, and I'm going to come back, I'm going to open that. I dated it so I could prove I knew. And then they tore down that section of the library. But you will have to trust me, when 2 years later they made the first announcement and we started finding them, that I was one of a lot of people who had suspicions, but now I have to live in a world filled with other worlds. The fun thing was they immediately started going bonkers. The planets were not what we expected. The very first kinds of planets we found were planets that were impossible. All of them. The very, very first ones we found planets around a dead star called a pulsar. You may remember this, which is an exploded sun that should have torched any planets that it had. I mean, like Alderaan in Star Wars, gone, okay? But it had planets. And so all the theorists are going, I'm glad they found them, but those are wrong. That's not supposed to happen. It turns out they think that the thing did blow its planets apart when the star exploded and the debris didn't leave. And it swirled back around together and made new planets out of the wreckage. So it's cool. It's a neat thing, but how fun that the first thing the universe did was whack us across the nose and say, you may not have imagined everything that's out there. The second one, same routine. We found one around a star like our sun, which is nice, But it was a planet like Jupiter, a big, huge gas ball planet, in close. But the textbooks had been saying for 100 years that the reason Jupiter is out far from the sun, all the gas giant planets are far from the sun, is that's the only place you can make them. Far from the sun's heat, where there are not much metals and rock, and there's lots of ice and gas. And that's where those planets come from, because that's how it works. But there's a Jupiter sitting closer than Mercury, right on top of its star. And now it turns out, yeah, it looks like that happens all the time. The thing is, we're provincials. You got to remember, we're used to what we have locally here. It's like you lived in some little village in France and you'd never been to Paris. You know how towns work until you get to Paris, and then you find out that there's more than you imagined. All of the cases here of different kinds of things, like in the upper left there, we have a planet showing spirals getting in closer to its star. That's now what they think happened with the hot Jupiters, is that they did form farther out, but then wandered in close later and got trapped close to their star. Current explanation change is possible. Then up on the other side there, we have planets with two suns at big distances, an orange and a white one, big distances from each other. It was in the textbooks. If you have double stars, you won't have planets, because the gravitational influence of the two stars will disrupt the material, and you can't make planets, except we started finding lots of planets going around one star or the other of wide pairs. And then they said, well, yeah, but if the two stars are really close together, meaning they're seriously throwing shade on my Tatooine sunset, okay? Meaning the two suns close together, they said, that can never happen until we started finding them. And now it looks like that too is possible, okay? So, and now, if you want to get into a pie fight with people, really start a bar fight in an astronomy club. Talk about the bottom there, the dark one down over the bottom side. Planets with no suns wandering through the dark. We've already found such planets. But the official explanation is how you make planets means it's absolutely impossible for a planet to form without a star to start the process. You can't do it. That's the official explanation. If you can make planets without stars, there may be lots of little planets drifting all through the galaxy all the time that never had a sun. That is an unknown. We don't know the answer to it today. It has big implications because we are flying through the galaxy, and we might have one of them pass through. It could happen. Could be a big deal if it did. We just don't know the answer. Planet names. When they start finding planets, the first thing every kid who grew up with Star Wars like me wanted is, give them cool names. I want to have a collection of postage stamps from, Zuba Wooby 47 and, Altho Managua or whatever. Just come up with these fun names. And they gave them astronomy names, HD 1879-23b, okay? The astronomers, this is an official statement by the International Astronomical Union, the official judges on all things astronomy. No, by the way, you cannot buy a star name. That is a scam. You understand this. The real naming of stars is done by these guys, and they said basically, we don't know enough about them to give them names, it's premature, let's wait. People, they were up in arms. They didn't want to have anything like this. Saying, well, these are planets, they need real names, and freeway off-ramps, and Starbucks, and all the things that make planets real places. Well, update, they changed their mind. I guess people were throwing bricks through the windows down at the IAU because they changed their mind, and they actually started having a worldwide contest to name worlds. That's a cool contest to win, isn't it? Oh, I named a world today. And some of them are cool names. One of the worlds out there is named Galileo. There's a world named Galileo now. And you can see some of the different names there. I can't pronounce that particular star's name. Oh, some people got to name suns too. If they only had a catalog number, you could name the local sun and name its planets. And in this case, Hypatia got a planet. Do you guys remember Hypatia? That's the in ancient Alexandria. It was a woman astronomer who was actually killed by the local people. She was murdered by them. She got a world there. And you can see other ones down there. Harriot. Harriot is a planet now, named for Thomas Harriot, who was an astronomer in England, using a telescope at the same time as Galileo, but he didn't publish. He had some drawings he made, but he didn't publish, so Galileo gets all the headlines. People around every British pub cheering for Thomas Harriot finally getting a world of his own. Anyway, so there are worlds now with cool names. For example, 51 Pegasi b, the first one we ever found out there around a star like the sun, this is one of those hot Jupiters. It got a cool name, Dimidium. Love the name. They named it that because it means half. It's half as heavy as Jupiter. So they decided to name it Dimidium for half. So, fun names. Fun places to fight over someday, I guess. We started finding them and finding them and finding them and finding them. And as you can see here on this particular chart, in 1996, we lost our crown for having the most planets here in our system. And oh boy, it's gone on from there. Now we know of a lot more planets somewhere else than here. Okay, there's your numbers. As of May 24th, 4,071 planets. You can substitute the word world. 3,043 systems. 659 of them are multiple planet systems. And while we're at it, 49 could be potentially habitable. Okay, I said the deep end of the pool, and I meant it. This is just a start. We were actually, some of us were talking earlier about this. There are somewhere around 400 billion suns in our galaxy. They used to think, oh, maybe 1 in a million will have a planet. The actual numbers, based on where we've looked and how many we've found so far, there are certainly billions of planets in our galaxy. Certainly billions. The question is to whether or not there are more worlds than suns in the galaxy, and there might be. It could be 1 trillion planets. Why? That's quite possible. And if that is true, I mean, what does that mean for us? What exactly are we in the middle of? You could have gone to the Turtle Club, and you're here with people telling you crazy things like this. See, the thing is, the blue marble. We're so proud of our Earth. I get it. Of course, it's home. It's beautiful. I love it and everything else. But look what we're really treading into here. That's our marble. We've always thought of ourselves as being special and unique. Some people, for philosophical reasons, maintain, and I respect that we are absolutely unique and always will be. Sure, okay. But the science here is posing a pretty startling shock. What would people in medieval times have thought? Not just, oh, perhaps sitting on my philosophy rock, oh, there could be another world. No, there are a lot, and this is very small and a tiny part of it all. What does it mean? Pictures like this. One of the Apollo 8 astronauts famously said, we went to the moon, and what did we discover? The Earth. True, quite true. The dawn of the ecology movement, right? April 23rd, Earth Day, all the rest of this. A lot of that's traced to this moment, looking back from a dead planet at a living one. But what exactly did we discover at this moment? Is it that the Earth is this shining oasis of life in the black void of space? That's what everybody talked about at the time. But I've talked to Jim Lovell about this, and he reminds me, yeah, but I could cover it up with my thumb. Ouch. Wow. If you ever want to know how big the Earth is from the moon, it's the size of a quarter held at arm's length. That's how big it is. He could, with a space-suited glove, he could cover it up, and it was like it had never existed. So you could look at the Earth, or you could look at all that blackness. It was either humbling or wonderfully complimenting who we are and what we are. Are Earths a dime a dozen? We don't know. We really don't. I mean, we'd like to think we are special somehow. I mean, nobody else has got Starbucks. Nobody else has got Starbucks. But, you know, what if some of them were better? What would that mean? How would we feel about that? It's kind of tough. But that's the kind of thing that's going on right now in astronomy, is we're looking around and we're starting to find these, 49 so far that could be habitable. And with better instruments and everything else, we may soon find one and know it really has beaches. It really has sunrises, sunsets, and beautiful rainbows and all the rest. It's possible. So the numbers we mentioned here, I should say, are daunting. I talked about 1 trillion planets. There are probably not 1 trillion Earths, though, because Earths are going to be really, really rare. They got to be the right size. They got to be the right distance from their kind of star. They have to have been stable for a long time. There are probably only a couple million. So I didn't want you to worry about it. Oh, boy. So what has actually happened here is not that we lost our marble, it's just in context now. There are a lot of marbles out there. We don't have the answers to all these questions now, but you are probably the last generation that will start their lives in a world where the Earth was alone. You're the last ones. There'll probably never be another, because from here on out, people will be born knowing the Earth is one of many. That doesn't mean Hollywood's going to get it right, though. My degree is in television and film production, and I've done more fakery than the National Enquirer. Trust me, okay? If I wanted to make a real living, I'd fake UFO pictures, guys, because I could really get you. But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. We have a long tradition, though, of exploring new and strange ideas in things like science fiction. Our culture is asking these questions, talking about it, and getting ready for it. In the same way that in the 1600s, people were talking about the New World. Okay? They're getting ready for a new world because there are stories being published about it. People are talking about it in the village square. Movies have tried to get it right. They show Destination Moon, right? I believe 1950, if I'm remembering correctly. Before we get to the moon, we imagine going to the moon. We show you what it might be like, okay? Got it at least partly correct. How exactly realistic? Okay, I mean, come on. Everybody knows Lizard Man down there is off the 14, okay, and Vasquez Rocks. They don't really look like monsters. Mr. Spock does not look like an alien. He's from Philadelphia, all right? He's a very handsome guy with a weird haircut and little rubber ears glued on, okay? But we're starting to think about these ideas, and they've become more natural to us, and so now really, we're kind of ready for it. Like I was talking about my double sunsets. I'm not sitting there trying to figure out how you could have two suns in the sky. No, I saw Star Wars. I'm ready for this. So there's a role for this, even if this stuff is a little bit silly sometimes. Now, for amateur astronomers, what do we like to do? We like to destroy people's worldviews. I have done this so many times, and let me tell you, it can be fun to watch the circuit breakers pop in somebody's head. When they've never thought about the moon being a planet with mountains and things like that on it, they see it for the first time. They see Saturn's rings. That's the bad one. Oh, Saturn's rings. And you show somebody just, I need some time here. And it's kind of fun. You sit them down, they have the coffee, and eventually they feel better. But that's what amateur astronomers do, is what you folks will probably do when you leave here tonight, when you go talk to your friends about the idea. There may be 1 trillion planets in this galaxy, maybe 1 million Earths. That's going to cause some serious crisis in somebody's life. Enjoy, please. It's a gift from me to you. Everybody remembers seeing something like this for the first time. When your life started going on this new path, seeing Saturn for the first time, you are not who you were before you saw this, before you started talking about these ideas. We do this all the time. This is in my astronomy club. This is some of us showing the sun to some unsuspecting little girl who probably will end up walking on Mars. And then we get to stuff that freaks us out. Oh, moi. If you want the public to not be frightened about something, make its name unpronounceable, and it will not be on the news. You guys all know about this, the asteroid from elsewhere or something that fell through the solar system. This happened just recently. So we realized, finally, we found something from out in the galaxy. It's falling through our solar system. Best telescopes in the world can't resolve more than a tiny speck. But how many of you folks have heard about this interstellar visitor before? Okay, there's a few of you. And then remember they start talking about the rotation rate, and then they were calculating what its shape might be, and they said it looks like it's about 8 times longer than it is wide. Like that. That doesn't look like an asteroid anymore. It looks like a spacecraft. Big spacecraft. That's what it looks like, okay, in its shape. Now, they're still arguing about the shape, but the point is, everybody was kind of scratching their head going, here's a question for those of you who've already heard about this thing. It fell through our solar system, tore on out, flew out at escape velocity. It's already headed out of our system. Do you know which planet it passed closest to? Earth. Our solar system is 30, what they call astronomical units wide. Think of it as 30 inches, okay? So the solar system would be this big, orbit of Pluto. It would have passed the Earth within 1/10 of an inch, 0.14 astronomical units. Right through the system, and the only planet it passed close to, right past the Earth. Probably just a coincidence, okay? But creepy. Now, if that thing had started to decelerate, we would be in a different situation right now, okay? Can you imagine this meeting? Can you imagine your town if it had parked itself in an orbit in the outer solar system after turning its engines on and was sitting out there right now? Wow. And anything like that could happen at any time. It's always possible. I mean, I don't believe in flying saucer aliens because I've never seen anything like that. But given what you know and all the planets that are out there, discoveries like this, even if this was just happened to be a rock that flew past, this is weird. And I got to admit, it gave me the willies. It bothered me. Because if we were meeting our betters, that doesn't always go so well, does it? I mean, ask the Aztecs. So if that was the case, I'm a father. I have a daughter. If there was a situation like this where we met our betters and they didn't mean us happiness like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, if it was bad, there was nothing I could do to protect my daughter. Nothing. I could call the president, I could call the Marines, we could launch nuclear weapons, but to creatures that could do this, our weapons would be tinker toys. We'd be trying to stop Panzer tanks with Cro-Magnon spears. It would be a joke. Confronting these issues, there's a reason your neighbors are uneasy about this stuff. Because it is a daring and bold thing to be interested in astronomy. And boy, don't you see it. This is just a rocket launch over actually my hometown. You may have heard of it. Anaheim. Now, in California, for those watching around the world. And this was a day where the SpaceX launched a rocket and it put on a big light in the show. But what's interesting for me, I watch these YouTube videos and you listen to the people's voices. Check it, SpaceX launch, YouTube, you can hear, never mind the picture. Listen to what the people are saying. Where people will be saying, what is that? What is that? Oh my God, what is that? I don't like this. What is that? Because it's strange, it's alien, it's in the sky. They don't understand. And that's what it's always like on the frontier when you're poking your nose into these strange corners of reality. I don't blame Bart. I don't blame my neighbor. He would rather just hide under a rock and make all this stuff just go away. You've got the asteroid going to wipe us out. Right? How often do we talk about that? Anyone want to talk about Apophis? the Egyptian god of prophecy and doom. Yeah, they named an asteroid after him that's going to come close enough to us, you'll be able to see it with your eye. And it's an asteroid that would be large enough to wipe us out, okay? Just in case you wanted something to cheer you up, down the road in 2037. No, it's actually a cheerful thing, because before we didn't know they were out there, right? And now we're going to be able to find a way, hopefully, to deflect them if they come our way. But it's a scary kind of thing to talk about. And then you've got, of course, the UFO alien gray creature things. And the stories they tell about these guys, they seem pretty weird. Like dissecting cows and stuff. It's kind of strange. And I don't know if I'd like these guys. I don't mind people being uneasy about it. The spy satellites, weapons in space, all of it. So if you're freaked out and you want to make a run for comfort, I have your answer. I've got you covered. Model railroading. Model railroading solves everything. And if you're thinking I'm poking fun at you, I run both HO and O gauge railroads, all right, okay? I love trains. But one of the things I like about trains is they don't change. My little world, my little layout, the SP daylight will always be running around in a circle right where it's supposed to be, and a million other hobbies, other things you could do. Postage stamp collecting, square dancing, whatever you want to do that doesn't involve worlds exploding, okay? Because astronomy's like that. But you're wading into it. You're the bold ones who are willing to do this. What's next? Am I willing to stick my neck out a little bit here? What will cause everyone to freak out? This is kind of an ascending list. I'm always waiting for this stuff. What's going to set Bart off down the street, okay? And cause everything to freak out. People put boots in distant dirt again, meaning like go back to the moon. People are going to have to wrap their head around it. People are going to have to really see people out there. It was a big deal in 1969. Did you guys enjoy the fact that the news media didn't know what to do in 69? Does anybody remember the TV coverage? I was 4.75, but I remember watching Walter Cronkite, and Walter didn't know what to say a lot of the time. They brought on Count Basie and his orchestra because we don't know, but we know this is all really important. He's going to play a song about the moon now and stuff like that. Does anybody remember David Brinkley? Love David Brinkley. David Brinkley and Chet Huntley. Chet was out there looking at the moon rocket that was going to take Apollo 11 to the moon, and he's out there saying, when I was a kid, if somebody said they'll be on the moon someday, you chalked them up as a nut. And then David Brinkley, bless his heart, from the newsstand, he's got the Saturn V behind him. He turns around. He says, well, it's about to happen. And what else could you say? That could happen again. Number 2, we find evidence of life, like life on Mars. That would be a big jolt for us. And it's possible that it could happen, especially on Mars, maybe Europa, Enceladus. Or we get hit by an asteroid. Right? Chelyabinsk in Russia. You guys saw the pictures of that? That was nothing. What if Seoul, South Korea, caught one, and everybody in Seoul is dead? They're just dead. There are 1 million people dead, and it's no one's fault. It's a rock that came out of the sky, and especially if the scientists came back and said, we didn't see it coming, and if there's another one, I don't know what we do. Wouldn't that change everybody's perspective on the universe? Wow. NASA's budget would instantly skyrocket, okay? But this is something that may happen, it may be hopefully in a small way, like Chelyabinsk was a wake-up call, okay? Hopefully in a small way. We find another blue marble, meaning we really, not just that it's in the right place and the right size, but it's blue and it's got clouds on it, and it looks like it might be another Earth. That would cause the psychological disruption that I talked about. Number 5, now we're getting into big stuff. We hear somebody talking out there, okay? There's a radio signal and it ain't us. I know how people would feel because I've been there. I've had that day start to happen and then stop. at the observatory. We had a buddy of mine who pays attention to these emails, and NASA put out a circular saying a strange radio source has been detected. It's here and here in the sky. It's following the stars. No one will admit that it's theirs. All observatories around the world, please start tracking this signal. And we all kind of sat up going, today's the day. Today might be the day. And we were waiting as other observatories started tracking this thing around the world. They checked with the Russian government said, no, it's not a spy satellite. NORAD said it's not a spy satellite. It's not orbiting the Earth. It's tracking with the stars as if from a great distance. We started getting more and more nervous. We went to a star chart, an atlas. We spread it out on a table. We got the coordinates. And the darn coordinates lined right on top of a sun-like star. And we all go, oh man, 104 Pisum, if you're wondering. We thought the 104 Pisums have just placed a call. What a day that would have been. What an amazing day. It could happen at any time. It wasn't that day. The Russians were lying. It was a Russian military satellite. They actually have a secret kind of 366-day orbit that they use around the Earth that mimics a star. That was the trick. They didn't want to admit it, but it wasn't that. But then, of course, number 6, think, oh, moi, somebody drops by. Okay, I'll admit, I'd be excited, I'd be thrilled. I would like to be the guy who just strides right out there onto the lawn and says, hi, where are you guys from? Oh, Zeta Reticuli. Yeah, I had a feeling about that one. Do you guys drink beer? Probably, though, I'd be terrified, just like everybody else. But it's possible. Well, I make predictions about this. Of course I don't know, but you'd be mad at me if I didn't stick my neck out a little bit. Scientists won't stick their neck out. Artists are willing to do it because we're stupid. Okay, we're willing to do this. Here's my predictions. The first 2 predictions are already handled. They're already true. They weren't when I made the slide, which is fun. That solar systems are all over the place, but solar systems are very different from each other. Lots of variety, but they're out there. And then to say that worlds are also all over the place, but they're very different, one from the other. In fact, different in ways we can't even imagine. I will put my guess out. Life is probably common, meaning millions and millions and millions of different worlds have life on them, but that it is very different one from the other place. There will be some things in common, but it'll also be beyond anything science fiction's been able to imagine. But I think that's probably the case. That may be what we're facing. If not, if we're all alone, and maybe we are, it's all ours. Just saying. For anybody who's interested in Starbucks franchising possibilities, 400 billion worlds. Just saying. So Earth could be unique in its details, but common in the big picture. And last, this painting I did way back in 1993 came from a visit actually to Mexico, of all things. Went down to the beach to go see the southern stars there, which I'd never seen, and I ran into the water, in fact, to try to get closer to the stars. Kind of a silly thing to do, I guess. But the cosmic ocean, we are still children, certainly, and we are on an island. We're looking out into the deep, asking these big questions. We want to explore and to learn more, but at the same time, we also can be intimidated by all this. Be understanding of those feelings in yourself and in your friends as they come into this. Approach astronomy gently and with the understanding that all of us who ask these questions about that deep ocean, you even being here tonight, you're brave for doing it. It's one of the things that makes us so special, is that we're willing to ask these questions and to imagine and confront the changes from going in just a lifetime, single lifetime, our lifetimes, from 9 planets to 9 billion worlds. Now, with that, folks, I want to say thank you very much for having me. It's a delight to speak with you all, and I'll be happy to take a few questions if you have any. Any questions for me? Oh, thank you. to have questions. Oh, yes, sir.
Tell us about your conversations with Carl Sagan and Stephen.
He was asking, tell me about your conversations with Carl Sagan and Stephen Hawking. The conversation with Carl Sagan will disappoint you in some ways. It was, however, astonishing who else was there. This was at the Pasadena Convention Center when they had one of their big Planet Fest things where they would discuss results from recent missions to planets. They had not only Dr. Sagan, but they also had Ed Stone, Dr. Ed Stone, who's the director of JPL at the time, very senior guy, kind of a big high domed forehead. You would have seen him many times in the television coverage in the 1970s and 80s with Project Voyager, and a legendary planetary geologist, Eugene Shoemaker. Shoemaker-Levy 9, the comet, he was one of the discoverers of that. Gene Shoemaker is a legendary guy in many ways. Anyway, I got claustrophobia in the room, and everybody smelled kind of bad because it had been raining. And so, it was just kind of this humid environment on the inside. So I got out of the seat, went out to the lobby, was hanging there, and here comes Carl Sagan. And here comes Gene Shoemaker. And here comes Ed Stone out of the restroom. And I'm just standing at the wall, and the three of them are standing right around me. And they're having a conversation among themselves. And they were talking about, the event and things like this. But I remember what Sagan said in particular, which I love. His voice, it's not the B's. That's not the thing. It's the cadence. Because he would speak, and then he would pause. And what he said is, we all smell like wet dogs. Now, that's my dominant thing. Remember joking with Carl about the fact that he didn't want to be in the room either, and everybody was miserable, but he hoped that we're all going to have a good time. That was my one conversation with Carl. Stephen Hawking was a number of years later. He actually spoke at some events at Caltech, and he would come down there on the stage and everything else. He had some prepared remarks, but he would also answer questions. And you have never seen people so intimidated as all the physicists and mathematicians who would come to hear Dr. Hawking. And they were practically crawling coming into the room to hear this man speak, which was this, by the way, for any person, my brother's an activist with disabled people, handicapped folks, and he would have appreciated so thoroughly how Dr. Hawking made a mockery out of every prejudice anyone ever had. When I was young, we were not as highly evolved in our thinking yet. His mind was that room. And he proposed something so scary to everybody. There's a mathematician named Gödel, I think his name is, who proved that mathematics can't be proven. Little scary to scientists, okay? He said any self-referential system can never, ever, ever be completely accurate if the only way to check it is with the same system. If the only way to know that 2 plus 2 is 4 is that 4 minus 2 is 2, you're still using math, and it can't be guaranteed. He said, therefore, there's no guarantee that any answer we ever get in physics is absolutely true. And the whole room just died. Everybody was leaning back, and he said, but think of it as job security. And I was like, yeah. Anyway, after that talk, I was still laughing about that, and I went outside, and he actually came over with his nurse. And it was just the three of us. And we hung out, and he was like, did you like the lecture? I was like, I didn't understand any of that, Doc. I'm not a mathematician, whatever else. He was a lot of fun. He did crack some jokes that are rude enough. I'm not going to commit them to anything. The man had a sense of humor, and he was so wonderfully endearing that I know someday I will go to Westminster Abbey again, and the difference will be he wasn't there the last time that I was there. And when I get there and I see that plaque on the floor, I'm going to go to pieces because he was such a wonderful guy. Any other tough questions? Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Before this, I was talking with a friend who couldn't come, and we were wondering what the planets are made out of. Where did this material come from?
The question is, what are the planets made out of, and where did all this stuff come from? The fact is that the ingredients change constantly over time. When the universe was born, there were only 3 chemical elements in the whole universe. There was hydrogen, there was helium, and a tiny bit of beryllium, atom number 4. They usually don't include that because there wasn't much of it. And it turns out, if that was all the stuff you had to make stuff with, the only thing you could make is a star. You couldn't make a planet, not a solid planet, very well out of that. They don't think planets could even form when the universe got started because you didn't have enough ingredients to do the job. But stars do something weird. With the pressure and the heat and the nuclear reactions on the insides of stars, they start crushing atoms together and fusing them in nuclear fusion to make heavier and heavier and heavier elements. That's where everything else came from. It's from the cauldron at the core of a star, especially the big ones. Smaller stars like our star don't make as many of the elements, but the really, really big stars, especially when they blow up, they scatter all these other elements, all the way up to gold, uranium, silver, everything, including the bones in your hand. That's all calcium. So that's the creepy thing about astronomy, is that you can't keep it away. It'd be nice if you could go back to your normal lives after this, but the ghosts will follow you home, as they say at the Haunted Mansion. They will, because all those stars are going to be up there, and the sun, is the local star. This stuff won't go away. And the same thing there with all the chemical elements that are being constantly enriched as time goes on. The heavier elements are constantly made in stars and then blown out and scattered into the environment from which new stars are made. The enriching of that is what makes planets, but also life, possible. All the iron, all the sulfur, all the nitrogen, all the oxygen, all the carbon, all made in the center of a star. That's where it comes from.
It's not like lava.
It's not like lava, you ask. Well, all lava was made in the center of a star in a way, because all the rocks that are melted in a volcano, sure, those elements are made in the center of a star, but the center of a star is so much hotter than lava, you can't even imagine that kind of heat. In fact, you've only seen it once in your life, maybe a number of times, but only one place. You'll ever see it unless you've seen a nuclear weapon detonated. When you have a stove and you start turning on, it starts glowing visibly. It's that kind of funny brownish color, and it goes up into the orangish red. And if you really want to break your warranty on your stove, you can go up to yellow hot, and you can go up to yellow white hot, and then you go to white hot. By the way, you're dead at this point probably. Your house is burning down. But if you turn these things white hot like a welding torch, you can keep going into higher and higher and higher temperatures, and it starts turning blue-white hot at like 10,000 degrees, and you can keep cranking that stove past blue-white hot into purple-white hot. And now it's putting out X-rays and gamma radiation and all the rest of this, frying you. But that energy, just for a moment, you've seen in a lightning bolt. That weird purplish color is those kinds of temperatures. When that lightning goes through, the discharge can be at those kinds of temperatures, but just for an instant. Just for an instant. That's why it's safe. But it's enough to get rid of all the air, all the gas, everything else. There's actually a vacuum tunnel that's created down that thing, because the heat is so much, no physical matter can exist in there for an instant. And then the air collapses back into that space and makes a cracking sound, like snapping your fingers. And that's what it is. You've seen that kind of heat only once. But a lava glowing orange hot, a star would laugh at that. It's just not, fortunately, that kind of power isn't something we run into every day. Next question, was that? Yes, sir.
I was going to ask, closer to Earth, do you have any thoughts on that plasma streak from 2017 that I've seen a lot of rocket launches, and I've never seen anything like that?
Yeah, the strange effects of the rocket launches is what he was asking about. Why the SpaceX launches are so incredibly different. I've spent a lifetime watching rockets, When you hear there's a launch of a Falcon 9, if you live in a place where you can see it like we can here in Southern California, look, enjoy it, especially if it's sunrise or sunset. That it's astounding. And the reason it's astounding, it doesn't look like other rocket plumes. It's not the rocket part of it that makes such a difference. I have seen many a Minuteman launch, many an Atlas launch, the old rockets we've been using for years. You get the big fan of material out away. That's mostly ice crystals and dust and soot flying out, being lit by the sun. But the difference with the SpaceX rockets is that, you know, some of them they can come back and land, right? It means they have steering rockets on them. And that's when things get beautiful, is when the stages separate and you got your big fan of stuff up there like you would have for other kinds of rocket launches, they start pulsing the steering rockets. And when you do that, you put out this little blast of stuff into space. What happens is the gas goes out and freezes and it turns into a snowstorm. All these little ice crystals appear and fly away from the rocket. So you get these spirals and pulses of all these shells of things that look like jellyfish and everything. I knew this would happen, but I had no idea it would be so visible. But the SpaceX launches, because of the steering rockets on the first stage, when it starts to come back, looks very different. That's really the difference with them. All right, well, I'd like to thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you very much indeed.
Second World War, I've been in 20 countries. I've lived in the desert. I've climbed peaks in Southern California, even Mount Whitney. Give me a plausible answer. A lot of places I'd like to live, and I've visited, New Zealand, Scotland,
Right.
A lot of places I'd like to live. I would want to live on the moon, Mars. Give me a plausible. They keep talking about wanting to go there and start a colony, you live there. Give me a plausible answer.
There's nothing plausible in our system. There's no doubt about it. Not for living the way we're used to living, certainly.
Yes.
Now, I will say, if you had something going on the moon or Mars, and people had been there for a couple generations, they might get used to it. But no, you're quite right. This is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be pleasant.
I lived in the desert. That was the worst place I lived.
Well, the moon is infinitely worse than any desert. And you wouldn't live on the moon, you'd live in the moon. You're not going to be living outside.
What is the reason to do it?
Well, one reason to do it would be to get rich.
Rich?
Filthy rich. Meaning there is more gold, silver, and platinum in places like that than there is on the Earth.
We have a lot of opportunity to get rich.
Oh, of course we do. Of course we do. The only kinds... It's not going to be some abstract, we should go colonize or live in some place just because we should. No one will ever do that.
I'm 90 years old. I've had about 20, 25 different jobs. There's only 3 that I enjoy. Can you say they enjoy living on the moon or Mars? I'm talking about forget the money, riches, all that. Enjoyment.
Well, the problem is, if I lived in New York City, I wouldn't imagine, during the Wild West, Montana. Is there any reason to live in Montana? The answer would be just no. It's awful.
Beautiful.
Well, yeah, but people could think the moon was beautiful. It's an Ansel Adams photograph. If you don't like color, you might like it. You might like being able to fly, or whatever. You're, in the low gravity and things like that. They might like that. It isn't something you or I can imagine. I wouldn't do it. I'd visit, but I wouldn't live there.
I feel I'm an open-minded person, listening to reason. I haven't heard any reason. Any money is nothing.
Well,
You know what my mother used to say? Money is nothing. Your health is first.
True.
Would your health be in jeopardy?
In some ways.
Yeah.
They might also, though, be benefited. Lower gravity might help the heart, but I think honestly we'd get so weak we'd adapt to it, and then our lifespan probably go right back
You
to
look
where it
healthy.
is.
You look a reasonable man. Would you want?
No, I don't want to. I would love to visit. I don't want to
Okay,
live on the
visit.
moon.
That's a different thing.
Completely different
I
business.
don't even want to visit.
Yeah, I don't. I have met people who think that we should just colonize space and for no other reason. And it isn't for me. I wouldn't do that.
Mount Whitney tree line stops at 10,000. After you go above 10,000,
Sure.
rock and, you know.
It feels like that. I understand. I get it. A lifeless place.
Chris, I got a question for you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you taking.
Chris,
No worries.
question.
Yes.
We see a long way out there with all our telescopes and everything. We've
Sure.
identified a lot of things, and we don't see any little bleeps or high signs or anything.
No.
So if there's somebody out there, they're probably a long way away.
Maybe not. One of the things that we are assuming is that we know how they would signal. We were presuming that for a long time. For example, people who think that aliens would use radio, so there must be no aliens because we're not hearing any radio, have to bear in mind that radio may be a phase that lasts about a week in a civilization when it's a baby, when it's a teenager. You play around with that. Radio may not be the right way to do it. Some people have said, for example, gravitational waves may be the way to communicate across the universe. We couldn't even detect a gravitational wave until just recently. Now, I'm not saying they're aliens using gravitational waves. They might be using things we simply don't understand. But sure, every once in a while you'll catch a teenager, a brand new civilization, a toddler civilization, messing around with radio. You might catch them very briefly until 150 years later they figure out how to use interdimensional pulses or something maybe we haven't even discovered. So the fact that we're not seeing a universe flashing with masers or lasers or radio, it doesn't mean anything because we're children asking the question. We just have to keep looking and see if we see something that's clearly artificial.
A few months back, there was some sort of a radio signal detected. It was like a pattern repeated a couple of times or something.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that?
I've heard no follow-ups on that. It does happen sometimes where they'll get a very suspicious radio signal and then it stops and they lose it and they can't duplicate it. And if you can't have multiple observatories around the world all confirm it, in other words, maybe you really saw a flying saucer, but the minute you get your uncle out onto the porch to look, he looks and sees nothing. You're going, yeah, I know, it's gone. It just flew away. That's zero evidence. One report is not an answer. So it's got to be something that continues and something that we can confirm. So far, hasn't happened yet. But there are suspicious ones. Very well. They went through what can we do? Anything we can do. Orbital platform, no, they'll beat us if it's just heavy lifting.
They had projects MIS for man in space.
Man in space soonest.
Then MISS for
Yep.
man in space soonest.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
then MIST,
Yep.
man in space soonest, even dead.
That actually, no, it's true. They actually had proposals. I remember to just launch somebody to the moon and just leave them there with supplies until we can figure out how to get them back. I'm not kidding. It was proposed.
Well, Russia did that.
There are a lot of
That was
science
part
fiction
of
movies
Russia's
about
proposal
that to
because
Mars.
they knew the problem.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
They certainly knew.
We were going to go to Mars manned in 1986.
Yeah, I had one conversation with Von Braun about it when I was young. I remember how hopeful they were, but by 69, Spiro Agnew tried to do the speech after the launch of 11 saying, and now on to Mars, and everybody, quiet crickets in the room.
Because the whole thing really was a political issue. People psychologically felt if the Russians were up there, they could kind of just drop bombs.
That's right.
And so it was,
Red moon.
and once we had achieved going to the moon and shown that we were technologically superior, there was no than political
contest.
incentive
Yeah, that's
to go
right.
on to Mars.
But here's the problem. They were also afraid that whoever went out to these planets, including the moon, would just claim it like Columbus claiming America.
Oh, I know.
Remember that?
Yeah.
As they said,
Yeah.
a race into space, and we would just get left out. These dudes would go out there and just claim this place and that place and that place.
You
and this place, and
have
we're
just
screwed.
stumbled onto something that may be great fun for you in the next 5 years, and here's why.
Wow.
The United Nations Space Treaty 1963 and 67 amendments prevents any nation from claiming
They wanted
any
to do that.
portion of land on
Right.
any other world.
Right.
Some nations are not signatories, notably China.
Whoa.
And so this is what I've told people from the podium. Next time we go, there's a movement to go, for us to go to the moon, will be when China lands.
Oh, I always presumed that would be the case. And you know what?
And that's now working that way.
I
Couldn't we
am.
go and just claim it as international property, but nobody can touch or use it?
The Antarctic model is what they're using right now.
Yeah.
Meaning
Yeah.
that your base and the stuff in your base can be yours and belong to your country, and other people can't mess with your stuff at your
Yeah.
base,
Yeah.
but you can't claim the land underneath it.
Oh, underneath
That
it.
belongs
You
to
can have
all
uses.
people forever.
Right.
That will last exactly as long as the period before we discover mineral resources. I'm just saying, that's how long that lasts.
Nobody's necessarily going to honor it. It's
Sure.
another place to fight on, you know? Have war in Iraq, we can have war up on the moon.
Alpha Centauri and all the rest. If we bring our problems with us, the point is we need to upgrade ourselves as
We
we
have
are
to change
upgrading
our
our vehicles.
philosophies.
Indeed. That's obvious. That's clear. Yeah, we can't just
Okay,
go
so
after to
Chris, how do
conquer.
we upgrade ourselves? That's the biggest problem in the whole planet.
You come to talks right like this.
We, you know, in the
You're doing it
Okay.
right now.
All right, but we still have to have a higher consciousness and a sense of justice and fairness.
The fact that you're asking the question is the most hopeful answer I can give you. Because societies that are not prepared to consider moving to some new level feel absolutely no need to address the question. They don't worry about it at all. It never even occurs to them.
No, they're going to grab the gold, grab the best of it.
Exactly. It was kind of like things like, we've talked a little bit about some other species and animal rights and things like that. For most of the medieval period, the idea that you don't stick a red hot poker up a dog's rear end, which was great sport in England at that time.
Are you kidding?
Sure. Oh, people would just kill a dog because it was fun all the time. They were not alive as we are. They
Oh,
are
they-
scenery.
They're what?
They were like scenery. They were like a tree
Well,
or a rock.
they figured they didn't have any real feelings or real
They did not
emotion.
have a soul.
Because
Yeah.
they
That's what she said
justified
about raising people
brutality
that
based on that, just
Yeah.
like when we freed the slaves. I mean, I saw on PBS there was a document saying they're an inferior race, therefore we don't have to abide by them.
The trick when the answer starts to come around is the first time someone asks, should we be doing this? That's what I'm saying. It's the leading edge of a change in philosophy, is that the question even comes up.
Well, should we be doing this is very subjective.
Of course.
And you can give the answer that benefits you even if it hurts the other guy.
Of
But
course.
if you ask, would God like us to be doing this, you'll
Right.
get a totally different answer.
True, although
Depends on which God.
most people, my ancestors were Vikings, and I assure you, they invented the necessary gods to support whatever they wished to do. So,
Beyond that, but maybe we're not.
well, yeah, I mean, devotees of Odin who were on their way to Valhalla, trust me, they had no problem sacking the Irish monasteries and their gods. The time when Richard Nixon was running against John F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy went to great trouble, even though he and Nixon were similar ages, to make Nixon and Eisenhower tie them together as being part of an older generation with old ideas that were behind the times. Mm-hmm. So Kennedy's approach in the election was to desperately lash Nixon to Eisenhower so that Eisenhower made Nixon seem like yesterday's candidate, not the candidate of the future and tomorrow and American progress, blah, 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 blah.
And therefore, he can't talk about space.
Exactly. His advisors found that's a good angle. Everybody understands that. Everyone's afraid of the Russians, and Sputnik scared people silly.
And they were also afraid that the land would get claimed out there and we'd get left out.
Of course. The
Yeah.
whole idea, this coming age, we're going to miss out. This time, it won't be the cowboys, it'll be the Cossacks.
The Russians
And
will own the moon.
The Russians will own the moon and the stars and all. We're being left behind. That was a great slogan in the 1960 presidential campaign. I'm sure it helped Kennedy. The problem was after a Russian man went up, now it's
Now
Kennedy's
what?
problem.
Like, here
Everybody's
you
looking
are.
at Jack Kennedy saying, how are you going to solve this?
Mm-hmm.
And hence, well, actually, it was wonderful. We met someone who was involved in that decision-making process.
And there was
I was
a huge
trying to
debate whether we could
remember,
afford it.
but I think it was 1956 that my father was sent to Florida. We spent the summer there while he traipsed around with the three
Yeah.
men, traipsed around swamps of Cape Canaveral
Oh.
and decided where each thing would go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Atlantic Missile Test Range, as it was known back then, just a swamp.
Yeah.
And then they started building great things out there.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fantastic.
Do you remember in the movie The Martian, at one point, he'd done some studies, and he's talking to himself in the movie. It's
All right.
before the
Yeah.
thing blew up and he had to get off. But it turns out that technically, if you land on a planet and you raise a crop, there was something about him could technically claim
Oh.
Mars for the U.S.
Well,
Because he raised a whole season of crop. There's something in
There-
the literature.
It is true that old traditions about the improvement of land
Yeah.
for
Right.
settlers,
Like homesteading.
yeah, homesteading
Homesteading.
Act, that's true.
Yeah.
That is superseded by the UN Space Treaty that prevents that from applying on Mars,
But
theoretically.
the Chinese did not sign that.
No, they did
So,
not.
so where does that leave us and them? And
A
the last
very
letter,
good
so
question,
hope everybody's-
and I don't know the answer. If the Chinese land on the moon and claim any portion of it as sovereign Chinese territory, we are in a very interesting and complicated situation. I don't think they'll do it. I don't think they'll do it.
Because internationally, everybody would be inflamed.
And of course, their position would be so vulnerable. They can't defend the land from anybody else going.
Right.
I mean, not right now. Do they want
No,
to try
no,
to establish?
Stage a war on Mars or something?
There's no
Yeah.
point to that. That's silly. No, right now everybody is just as defenseless in space as Antarctic explorers would be. And you're glad to have anybody out there. Everybody's a friend in Antarctica because the enemy is Antarctica. So I don't think anyone's going to claim anything. But still, the point is
It
that
remains, yeah.
they could claim something crazy like that.
Well,
And
there
the
was
question
an
is,
idea of doing it.
yeah, well, actually, we were the first ones to risk violating the UN Space Treaty. This goes back a number of years ago. It was the US Congress wanted to have the Apollo landing sites incorporated into the US National Park Service to protect them from being violated.
Oh, wow.
And so if we had done that, we would be claiming portions of the moon
Yeah,
as
that's a
US sovereign
dangerous-
territory.
That's a dangerous
That's why it
move.
didn't happen.
Yeah.
They didn't
Yeah.
really understand. So there may be instead a United Nations World Heritage Site kind of protection put on it saying, no one approach it within this distance because you don't want to damage the footprints and all that stuff.